Coalitions in South Africa. Now, you cobbled together a coalition for the ANC in the Western Cape. The ANC achieved 46%, and you were then able to govern the province of the Western Cape. Now, the national picture is looking similar to, at least in terms of the consensus of projections as to where the ANC will land, more or less. Some say sort of between 45 to 50. My personal view is I think the ANC are going to get over 50%, like just about. But a lot of the discourse is around coalitions and preempting a lot of those things. So what are your thoughts about next year's elections and where we could land in terms of the different scenarios of coalitions?
Look, the first thing you've got to look at is what exists. You've got a firm in the middle ANC that has had 67%, 62% under Mandela, 67% under Thabo, then back to 60% under Zuma, and then CR, or the President Ramaphosa, kept it at 57%. That movement is largely by turnout, not always by defection. You don't find defection, you find turnout. On the right, you've had a solid, at best 28%, maybe 25%, but it was shared between the National Party, the Democratic Party, the Freedom Front, etc., until the DA gobbled them all up and now controls that 25% on the right. On the left, there's been a displacement effect. It's been almost around 8%. The EFF pushed it to 10%, but the signs are that it will come back to 7-8%. But by and large, in the first election, it was shared between the PAC, Azapo, and so forth. Then Bantu Olomisa came along, he took that 6%. Then COPE came along, they took that 7%. And then the EFF came along and swelled it to 10%. The point is, there are limits on the right and limits on the left, ceilings. And if you put both of them together, 25 plus 10 becomes 35. So the moonshot could be a shot in the dark. The best chance for the ANC, as is proven in the local elections, is that you only have a turnout of around 30% or less.
The best chance for the ANC to be displaced from
to be
government,
displaced,
yes,
is by turnout and not necessarily. Or even those who don't like President Ramaphosa knows that he's the best chance of staying above 50%. So everyone goes into an election to win, and so maybe your scenario one, that the ANC gets the 50.1% and governs. But coalitions are an insurance policy for when you don't get what you want. And the ANC knows it's in trouble. That's why it's talking the language of coalitions. It feels that it can, but it also feels that it can't. So it brings us to scenario two. And I'm going to be very provocative on this. Scenario two is where the ANC falls under 50%. I call the scenario two the reunification of the RETs. The RET inside the ANC and the RET in the EFF.
We're talking about the people, the cohort who specifically demobilized because they were tied to Jacob Zuma and wanted to hobble Cyril Ramaphosa's presidency of the ANC and of the country.
I don't think they're going to do that quickly or visibly. I think that there will be enough sanity in order to say, let's win it outright. Let's not take our chances.
But in scenario two, it would be a case of the reunification of those cohorts.
Yes.
What would they coalesce around? Which leader, what program, or is it...
The election will be interpreted as a rejection of sellout politics, moderate politics, business as usual politics, and therefore we need a radical program. We've always wanted to nationalize the Reserve Bank. now is our job. So that could be the reunification. I'm not too sure about it, but theoretically, it has to be thought. And then there's the third scenario, which is emerging very strongly as the Grand Coalition. So the Grand Coalition means that the two biggest parties run government. They don't have the same ideology, they don't have the same politics, but they have certain objectives that they would share. Now we must go back and say that in the history, for example, where I was in the Western Cape, and it was reflected in the first iteration nationally, we did have a Grand Coalition. In our case, the GPU, the Government of Provincial Unity, nationally the Government of National Unity, it was effectively the ANC and the National Party. And they governed the country in the first 4 years until de Klerk pulled out, and certainly for 4 years in the Western Cape with the ANC under Hernus Kriel as Premier. And so it was an enforced Grand Coalition. And the country was in transition. It needed political stability. It needed to ward off the idea of counter-revolution. And we built a zebra. And even in the way in which Nelson Mandela went about that zebra, he was president, de Klerk is vice president. Trevor Manuel, Minister of Trade and Industry, Derek Keys, Minister of Finance. Because the World Bank, IMF won't call in their loans from a white banker. To keep the mining interest here, Pik Botha for mining. To keep the farmers settled, there was a cry for Nikke, maybe. But that was the way in which we built a zebra government for the compelling conditions of 1994 for the first 5 years. So we did have a Grand Coalition at that point. In the Western Cape, there was an anti-ANC coalition that emerged in the 1999 elections. We got 42%. The DP got 10% or 12%, and the National Party got 38%. They combined their votes to keep the ANC out. It lasted 2 years because it was a negative coalition. They knew what they were against. And that was then when we took up an oppositional role that was parliamentary and extra-parliamentary. We didn't have shadow this and shadow that. What we had was organizers. You had to do your spokesperson work against your opponent in that coalition government while you had to mobilize a constituency. We took the anti-racism campaigns to every corner. Where they didn't want to cut black people's hair in Porterville, we marched there. Where they had farm workers in court and police stations in Albertinia, we drove there. And so we can go on that we created an enormous pressure cooker for that coalition to collapse. And so that was a short-lived one until it collapsed. And then we put together the ANC-NNP coalition that then went into the election, and we negotiated the portfolios based on who can best deliver to often mutual constituencies. The colored working class, represented by the NNP, and the African working class, represented by the ANC. The colored middle classes, represented by the ANC, with remnants of your Afrikaners who still adhere to the NNP. We shared the rural vote between the ANC and the NNP. But what was dominant in that strain was that we had all the poor under one coalition banner. There were racial tensions, but not class tensions necessarily. And we showed under the banner later of a home for all and Ikapa Eliglumayo, the Cape that we grow and share, we showed the ability of a coalition to deliver to its people until the electorate trusted that coalition again. We brought 46% of the vote. The NNP declined, but still took us to 53%. And then we absorbed them. And then we were able to move forward, and then we effed it up ourselves afterwards when we were on a trajectory. So that's the experience of coalitions. So what I'm saying is, contemporary times must look back and say, we actually had an enforced grand coalition. Secondly, we've seen the fate of anti-coalitions. Keep this one out. We've seen it then with the first iteration of the DA, the DP-NP coalition, and we've seen it in Johannesburg, and we've seen it in Tshwane, and we've seen it in Ekurhuleni, and we've seen it in Port Elizabeth, or in Gqeberha. We've seen it. Negative coalitions collapse under its own weight and create enormous instability. But short of a grand coalition would be a coalition that has minimum shared objectives. You don't agree on everything, but let's agree on shared objectives like we did with the NNP. Overlapping constituencies. They may not be the same color, but they could be the same class. Specific program outcomes, not too many. Minimum program, service delivery on this, that, and the other. Not solve all the problems. And secondly, safety, law enforcement, pushback impunity. You need key informants to it, is social stability, so that we can, secondly, facilitate economic recovery. That we can, thirdly, have political continuity of the middle ground. And finally, restore trust in politics and democracy itself. And then you need to underpin it with a management of differences and disagreements. And in that, you must bring your most respected leadership to the table. Not failed people. And the respect is consistent with the integrity on the one hand and balance. You can't put a loudmouth and an introvert in the same coalition. You then have to have channels of communication, regular meetings. In that situation, initially Peter Maree and I, and then myself and Martinus van Schalkwyk, we would meet twice a week, just problem solving and troubleshooting, checking on the different parts and creating a free space in which he could say, I don't like the way your minister is behaving there. He said something very bad about me there. And then we'd manage it. Because the coalition was more than the collective egos of everybody. And then you've got to have mediation and conflict resolution structures that you can put in place. So that's really the history of coalitions that we come from in the Western Cape. Nothing is new in the space. I think what is added to it is a lot of potential desperation. But it mustn't be about power. The moment you show your greed for power, they've got your number.
Yes.
They know they can horse trade with you. That has been the cunning of a Julius Malema. He smelt the desperation of the DA to be in government, and he had their number.
In 2016.
In 2016.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Roscoe Palm Show on Cape Conscious Media. If you want to support independent media and you enjoyed this content, then click like and subscribe one of these corners over here. We'll really appreciate it.